Yes.
Yep.
Good morning from British Columbia in Canada. I know it's evening over there, but it's 8:30 a.m. here. Good morning. So my name is Megan Smith. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Creative and Critical Studies at the University of British Columbia on the Silk First Nation unceded territories. And we are here in Kelowna on the Okanagan campus. I've been working in geolocated installation, new media art practice for many years. I've presented at EVA before, and it's so nice to be a part of it again this year. Despite being remote, it would be really wonderful to be in person. And I'll hand over to my colleague here.
My name is Yujie. I'm a PhD student, same with Megan, and my own work is generative participatory performance art, where I study the materiality of time and explore the elastic quality in rule-based environment.
So today we're going to talk to you about a new project. This is quite exciting for us because it is the first academic moment of releasing this project. It did begin to take shape out prior to the pandemic, but it really did happen creatively throughout the pandemic. Yes, we can move this slide. And I'm just going to adjust my screen quickly here so I can see my slides too. Perfect. So the project is called All the Stars We Cannot See, and this paper was used the title of the artwork and also added a deep look into real-time satellite traffic. And so what we've been building is an immersive installation, and it geographically situates people, participants in this installation under a virtual sky where they can gaze up in real time at 23,000 plus satellites as they fly overhead. And this is, you know, people have seen projects like this, for instance, on apps and AR devices with your phones looking at stars overhead, and sometimes you can see satellite traffic with various apps, but we wanted to look at that in a more creative way and see how we could build this project into something new. Right, and we also have a series of generative drawings that we've been building out of that, and we get a chance to share those with you. And you're the first audience to really see this work. So this presentation includes the research creation process that we've used to evolve this project, and some technical infrastructure information, and like that detail of how we built the project using Touch Designer, and the installation plan for the work that we have for the VEMS lab, or the VEMS studio. It's the Visualization and Emerging Media Studio here at the University of British Columbia. So the thing that we started thinking about was, you know, as any good researcher, or designer, you ask a good question and your cup fills with great ideas. But one of our big questions was really, how many satellites are out there in the world above us? You know, how many satellites are circumventing the Earth, and what is that? How does that visually take shape? Because we can look up into the sky and we can see in the evening satellites moving overhead, but how do we actually see that density, and what kind of density is there? So it turns out that we can move. Yeah, let's move. Yeah, it turns out there are a lot of satellites up there. So satellites, as most of you know, are space-based objects that move in orbit around our Earth. this research, so the work that we've been doing specifically looks at the human-made satellites, so human objects moving around Earth. And all of these objects have a gravitational pull that tie them to an orbit that we can map. Everybody on this call probably knows about the NORAD numbering system, but just to refresh you, the North American Aerospace Defense Command generate identification numbers for all human-made objects that are launched into space. And there are currently, now this is at the time of sending this paper in, and that number will have changed now, but it is relatively close. There are currently 43,235 objects assigned identification, of which 22,453 are actively being tracked by a web service called N2YO. Many of those items, so of the 43,000 items, many of those are no longer active, and many of them are also considered lost in space or defunct. So of the 43,235 objects, we were able to drill down into some of that data using, so there's N2YO, which is a wonderful service to look at what satellites are out there. It's public information. And Heavens Above is also a very good space for looking at what's there. But as it is, they are research-based spaces. There's lots of spreadsheets and classifications. So we tried to look at that in terms of categories and what we could discover in those categories, and link that with GIS basic information. As I mentioned earlier, I've been working with geolocation and art making and web-based projects for a number of years. So it's, continuation of our practice in that area. And so once we started to look at the satellite categories, we could see that we could form some stories, for instance, based on how many satellites were launched in 1990 or how many were launched in 2010. All of this information we could then categorize with a color, for instance, and then we could visualize those satellites and then assign colors to years or assign colors to actual categories like military or education satellites, weather satellites, and things like that. And so that brought us to those research questions and research practice questions, which were, do we want to set up this visualization with one location? So as you're looking and observing this space, do you want to see the satellites that are moving overhead in real time? Since we can't really see that information, we may see snippets of it at night, but we don't really get the full scope of it. Or do we want to have interchangeable locations? We kind of settled on the idea of wherever this installation goes around the world, we will set the geolocation at that space so that you can see in real time what is happening. And that has proven really insightful for really getting the full scope of what's happening. And the longer that you spend in the space, the more you understand what is happening as well. We also considered looking at historical sites. Like, do we want to identify places? Do we want to look at, for instance, Washington and see, are there more satellites flying overhead in that location, or are there fewer? Is some of this satellite traffic politically driven and geolocated in specific locations to monitor places, right? Do we find a way to build an experience that tells a story of various spaces while a person is experiencing the installation? And then is the story related to a physical location of the audience? Those are the questions that we kept pondering, and then eventually we came up with like this, we went back to the numbers to figure out how to deal with this.
Right. So we start off this project by looking through the public accessible satellite data set, as Megan mentioned. We pulled real-time data with various categories. And so far we have applied 4 categories and have aimed to do more in the future. So as artists, we look at these categories that are running for different purpose, education, military, or whether, or owned by different countries, the United States, Canada, or China, and thinking how we could use varied pictorial elements to differentiate these characteristic. So our technical framework was done in Touch Designer. It's a node-based visual programming environment for real-time interactive multimedia content. And it has been used by a lot of artists and programmers. Once we had the real-time web-based API pulled into Touch Designer, we have developed a linear process in Touch Designer for parsing data, storage data, and 3D rendering for outputs. So this process enables us to look specifically at satellite traffic through various parameters over a specific period of time. And one of the things in our technical development I want to highlight is how we storage data over a period of time. So once the data flows into the program through the API, we pull the satellite's footprint, which is latitude and longitude, that are formatted in decimal degrees. And we store these numeric data as RGB into a lossless image. So each pixel of this image stores a specific position data for a satellite at a specific moment. So for the image we stored, the first pixel of the row will be the current location of the first satellite in specified category. And we have RGB 3 values, and then we specified R as latitude and G as longitude. And then the first row of the image will be 1 timestamp of the location data of all the satellites in specified category. And row by row of the image will be accumulation of the location data, all the satellites in that category over time. So each line is a specific moment. And then these data were read by programming during this 3D rendering pipeline. And these are an overview of all the drawings we have been outputted.
Okay, so I'm gonna just zoom in on this one. So this is one of the early drawings that we did in March 2021, which isn't very long ago, actually. We we tried renderings of the Galileo and different things, but we actually hit the button and decided to visualize all the active satellites. And this was quite incredible to us to see this information. So this is a rendering of, this was over 21,000 satellites visualized. And in that image, you see that, okay, let me just check my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything here. These were all the active satellites on that day. And the image was rendered without adding trails. So we did actually program in a trail so that we could track the satellites moving over time and show their path. But for the last slides, we didn't do that. So of note here are the green dots in this diagram. So once we started to put up the satellites, this is based on years. So we assigned a color based on the decade actually that the satellites were launched in. And so if you can see the green line, I don't know if that's coming through well enough on your screens, but this is SpaceX Starlink network, which appears as significantly different pattern as other satellites. And that is because Starlink has launched, well, over, I don't know, at the time of writing this, so it was 550 satellites. It's probably over 900 now. We see this, there's a rapid change in the way that satellite visualize the satellite paths and the actual image or the visuals of these satellites, the formation of them is changing because of Starlink. And we find this also interesting in terms of how over the years, the course of launch has been relatively smooth in terms of growth. There was a year, an anomaly in 1999 when China launched 3,563 satellites that year. So that really was a bump in terms of how many satellites were orbiting Earth. But now with Starlink launching quite regularly, this number is growing significantly. So that was a big eye opener for us. And then we started to look more at other things. Like we went to the Galileo satellites, which track the GPS, the GIS systems. And so we started to look at that data and see what we could discover in terms of patterns. And these are some of the graphical images that we'd like to develop and print out. We have here on May 4th, which we could not resist recording on May the 4th, recording. So we did Starlink on that day, and you can see the pattern of geolocation that they're doing or orbiting our Earth in different ways. And at this point we started, so right now we've been playing. So these are some images of what we were kind of curious about in terms of applying different styles, different paintbrushes to our data. So these are drawings you made tracking satellites, but we've played with the way that we're rendering the images to see what we can discover creatively in terms of building up our installation for the future. And so seeing how much texture we want to articulate, what kind of gradients, what we want to see. And we're playing at this stage, which has been quite a nice process. And so instead of relaying factual information in a clear-cut way, we're trying to bring in the creative process to open people's ideas and immerse them into a space where they can experience this satellite data and also feel fully immersed in it and visually interested in that information. So we have an installation planned at the VEMS lab. You can see in this slide, there's a multi-screen studio that's being built at UBCO. Unfortunately, this space is still under construction. There's delays because of COVID border crossing protocols between Canada and the United States, which have been a hurdle in installing this work. But as soon as this room is complete, we will be the first project launching up in that space. So the idea is that you will enter this space and you will be surrounded by this global positioning image and data, all of the satellites moving over you as in real time. we'd like to install grass and picnics, so somewhat like a Starry Night, except that we are shifting towards the identity of it being, oh, I'll go back here for a second, of it being a project that tells us a little bit more about that space traffic or that space junk, on how dense the population of these satellites are orbiting our Earth. And the premise is that if we start to visualize and start to understand all of this information and see what is traveling overhead, we have a better understanding of what is happening. It's easy to be on the ground and let that pass by, but I think it's time that more people, not just the academic environment, but a greater population of people understand how dense the satellite traffic is. We also have plans for development for AR and VR. As you know, the project lends itself quite well to those domains. If anybody is interested in working on that, then please reach out to us. We are just 2 people and we could expand our team for sure. So I'll come right here, and this is the end of our presentation. I just wanted to thank you. This is a glitched image of one of our renderings showing over 23,000 satellites being tracked. And we're quite excited by the launch of this project, and we really would like to show this to the public. And we're very happy that we got to present it here at EVA London for the first time. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. It was a very interesting and fun project.